all sorts of people when they try to argue about technology, they just get rebuffed with, well, there was no way for us to know. That's almost always a lie. We knew all the things that have gone wrong in the past couple of years due to social media. We knew. We could have stopped them if people had listened.
That's a really distressing thought. Hello and welcome to Bad Astra. A quick note to our viewers. In this interview, we will likely be using words like queer or other words considered slurs when used by someone not in the LGBTQ plus community. Reclaiming words is great, but slurs are still harmful when used by people outside the marginalized community. It's why I can't say the N-word. For our cis straight viewers, welcome. Please use the word trans to describe someone who identifies as a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth, and LGBT community as an umbrella term. I will be deleting hate speech, misgendering, and bigoted opinions. I can't believe I have to say that. Okay, on to the interview. Dr. Michael Ann Devito is a researcher at the University of Colorado Boulder. Her research centers around how humans adapt to the complex, algorithmically driven systems that increasingly surround us, including how we come to understand these systems and how they impact self-expression, information sharing, and minority spaces. She's also interested in returning agency to individual users and minority communities, especially queer communities. Hi, Dr. Devito. Thank you so much for dropping by over Zoom.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to talk about research anytime.
Can you describe your overall field of research?
I bridge a few fields, actually. My training is in a bunch of different things. But where I do most of my publishing and most of my work is in human-computer interaction. And you can very much view human-computer interaction, at least as it exists today, as, I might get in trouble for saying this, but essentially the conscience of computer science. It is our job to, there are people who design these amazing systems. There are people who design these very efficient algorithms over computer science. And then there is this entire body of theory about, how humans act and how we should treat them, and how communities work that kind of come from the more social sciences. HCI is the bridge between the two, essentially. It is an attempt to reset, or at least modern HCI is an attempt to recenter the user in design and make systems work for and with people instead of forcing everybody to adapt to systems that just don't take human nature or human behavior into account.
I noticed on your website you say a lot about social computing. So what is social computing, one, and two, how do I get better at it?
So social computing is a subdiscipline of HCI. And it is the subdiscipline that really heavily focuses on how social processes, social groupings, and kind of our own identities are affected by technology. I bridge both social computing and mainstream HCI by doing design work and more theoretical work. But ultimately, social computing is where you're going to find most of the really interesting work on social media and a lot of things that the average person probably thinks of as the main internet, right? I mean, a lot of the stuff outside of social computing is really important. It's really important stuff, but it's more, more applies to business, that kind of thing. Social computing is the part of the field that is really about how all of this has become this huge part of our everyday lives. And I don't know that there is a way to get better at social computing because social computing is arguably an attempt to make HCI better at taking social stuff seriously and taking individual people seriously. HCI does a pretty good job of this compared to computer science to begin with, but we're the people that are saying and have been saying for the past 10 plus years, this social media thing, it might not be a throwaway thing, might be important, might have some sort of impact on the world eventually. I mean, you can look at papers as far back as 1996 that you could call social computing papers. And they are the first ones that say, this Facebook thing, it could have an impact on, say, elections eventually. Has anyone thought through this? So if HCI as a whole is the conscience, we are the hypervigilant part of the conscience.
That's really cool. I think it's awesome how there were people who were predicting all of this crazy global effect that social media would have way back in the 90s.
I mean, that's the thing. If you see, you try to argue about technology, all sorts of people, when they try to argue about technology, they just get rebuffed with, well, there was no way for us to know. That's almost always a lie. We knew all the things that have gone wrong in the past couple of years due to social media. We knew. We could have stopped them if people had listened.
That's a really distressing thought. It's also so surprising because, I mean, people always listen to scientists. Like when we say the climate is changing, people listen. When we say that the earth isn't the center of the universe, people always listen to that. When we say that the earth is round and not flat, people totally listen.
Oh, if only it were so. That would make my life so much easier. Then again, I don't know if half my job would exist, seeing as half my job at this point is explaining a lot of this stuff.
I mean, all of this YouTube channel is trying to communicate science. So if people just believed scientists, I'd be out of a job. The world would be a better place. But I personally, this isn't even my day job. I'd have to find another hobby.
Well, I have a feeling people will need science explained for a good long while. And I, on some level, I get it. It is hard to wrap your head around some of this stuff. And humans have a strong, strong tendency to want to believe that things are simpler than they are. But unfortunately, the world is really complex.
Yeah. But on the note of being self-centered and wanting things to be simpler than they are, my next question is, why am I like this? And more importantly, which social media platform should I blame?
So it's interesting. For the longest time, and some people still do this, but less. For the longest time, there was this distinction in everybody's head between the internet and real life. That was a nonsense distinction. That was a nonsense distinction almost at the outset. But it was harder for us to see that these were the same thing because powerful people especially kept a lot of their stuff outside of the online sphere. But obviously it affects us. Obviously it affects us. It opens up new opportunities, and some of those can be really good. So for queer people especially, find me a good lesbian bar somewhere. Most of them are shut down. We have online spaces, and that is about it. It opens up these amazing possibilities for queer people. But if you look at, say, TikTok, right? TikTok has opened up these amazing spaces for queer people, quite unintentionally. I'm certain the company didn't intend to do that. But it has also convinced a lot of people that they have psychological disorders that they most likely do not have, because it's all a like-based like thing. And, well, machine learning system is basically just a human-style pattern recognition system with zero wisdom, intelligence, or morality attached to it, or common sense, honestly. So I think that social media, it has done something to us. It has absolutely done something to us. But it's a really, really mixed bag. And a lot of my work is trying to preserve the good stuff, because honestly, a lot of the time within academia, what you come back with is, okay, burn it all down then. We have to burn it all down from scratch. And my participants don't want their online spaces that they've been in for 10 years burned down. They just want them to stop hurting them. So I very much believe we can make that happen, right? We can make that happen if we listen.
So how do I keep all of my Star Trek memes, but not the fascists? Because that's
hard choices on the part of the companies that own these things. I mean, let me step back for a second. I want to be very clear. I am a strong believer that the root of the problem, like the root of most problems, is capitalism. This is probably going to be unsurprising.
This channel does not pretend to be a friend of capitalism.
Good. This is the thing. Things don't need to be like they are. They are this way because we need to sell ads, right? There would be no reason for a company to ban every fascist. Like they could probably do it pretty efficiently, right? Fascists are not
subtle.
They're not subtle. And other than like leadership is often somewhat clever, but the rank and file fascist is not clever. They can't even come up with a different insult. Like I could show you in my own block list and ban list how easy it is to like pick a few phrases that they will always use no matter what and disappear them forever within your own spaces. We could do this. We could get rid of every fascist on every platform. I genuinely believe that. If we weren't also afraid of losing the advertising dollars that come from not just them being there, but people engaging in the fights they start. That's all traffic. That's all views, right? And if we didn't have that profit motive, there would literally be no reason for these companies to not get rid of them. I mean, with the exception of companies that are still run by like that weird set of millennial libertarians that took over for a while. They genuinely believe in the whole unlimited free speech thing. But, you know, that's easy to believe in if you're a cishet white man with rich parents. I'm sure, yeah, people can say whatever they want.
And wasn't that whole like millennial libertarian thing started by fascists?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they got duped. They got duped pretty bad. I'm not going to forgive them. They were stupid enough to get duped. But yeah, a lot of the problem with social media platforms in general is that they are run for the wrong reasons. And I think it's actually dangerous that sometimes we forget that and we try to say like the technology itself is bad. The technology itself has the potential. It has helped a lot of people and has the potential to help a lot more. We just have to wrest it away from people that want to use it for evil, basically.
Yeah.
You know, there are certain things, there are certain technologies which are evil of their own right. Facial recognition technology, for example, there is no legitimate reason for that to exist. But platforms can be that kind of neutral technology. We just have to decide what we want to do with them. And right now, what the people that are on them want to do is have a community. What the people that own them want to do is sell ads, and they don't really care what happens to the community. Another thing, you take away that ad motive, the community motive is kind of all that's left, and you've got something beautiful.
So I'm obviously in a lot of queer groups online, and in many of them, the M word, which is man, men, male sometimes, those words are banned from the group because posts with those words get blocked. And it's not just phrases like men are trash or this man is trash. Like those have been blocked for a while. And it seems a little weird because, you know, men as a group are generally the group in power. So it's not really hate speech if you're making a subversive joke like that. Like that is kicking up. That's how comedy works.
Yeah. I mean, I'd go along with you on that to the extent that I don't think you can be sexist against men. Just like I don't think you can be racist against white people. I don't think you can be sexist about men. It's a power relationship. Mm-hmm. And attacking the people with power is fundamentally never equivalent to the people without power being attacked. And I think a lot of what you're talking about really comes down to the fact that these platforms are run by incredibly privileged individuals that have led charmed lives. They genuinely think that me being misgendered is exactly equivalent to someone calling them a jerk. They think that's exactly equivalent. They hurt my feelings too. They didn't attack you at your core, my dude. Yeah. They've never had, I mean, a lot of these people that run these platforms, they've never had a single bad thing happen to them in their life, except people on the internet don't like them. Meanwhile, I'm over here getting death threats, and it's like, it's not equivalent, folks.
Yeah.
But the people who are in charge genuinely believe, because they are by and large cishet white men, that anything against cishet white men must be a slur, right? Well, we're counting things against women as slurs now, so things against men must be slurs now.
We had a group member after an abusive relationship. She would be terrified of certain behaviors in men. She was talking about how it was hard for her to get back into dating because she was the post was about her being a bi woman, but preferring to date women in general because of her past with men. And it was about her working through her own stuff. Like she never implied that it was anyone's fault except that one man who abused her. But she used the words men and terrified in the same sentence. Meanwhile, I'll see homophobia, transphobia, like blatant hate speech basically denying the existence of whole groups of people. I'm sure you've heard all of it. I'm not going to reiterate it. And I'm sure everyone watching this YouTube video knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I actually have gone through the exercise of reporting all of this hate speech that is dehumanizing. Like, and I've reported hate speech against me, which, like, as a cis white woman, I was not expecting. I am very confident in who I am, so it wasn't a big deal for me, luckily, because I exist in this place of privilege. I've had an incredible support network. My family, my wife's family, like all of our friends have been incredibly accepting. Like we live very charmed lives. So like, but I still report it because if any of this had been said to some, like, what you're attacking, I know you will also attack someone else. And like often I see people attacking other people. I'm like, I've seen blatant racism, homophobia, transphobia. You report it, and Facebook's like, we have determined that this does not like violate our community standards. So of course you appeal the decision. So a human sees it, and the human says, oh, this screed about how there are only two genders and the rest were made up by Democrats, which the screed went on, and there was some anti-Semitism in there because, of course, you always sprinkle anti-Semitism in any of your fascism.
Of course.
Like, it's part of the course. I'm like, they're like, yeah, no, that's not hate speech. They changed their dog whistles recently enough.
Right. I mean, this is the thing. We keep trying to solve the hate speech problem with automatic classifiers, right? Bots, essentially. Mm-hmm. That's never going to work. Hate speech is nuanced. I mean, sometimes it's really not nuanced, but people that know what they're doing, they're well aware. I mean, so a big part of my dissertation actually was trying to prove once and for all. We went like 5 years thinking nobody understood algorithms. People weren't aware of algorithms. And I decided my dissertation would be one giant act of calling bullshit on what I found to be nonsense. Not to say I want to be very clear. The older work was by people I really, really respect. And at the time, it made sense to think of it like that. But I mean, think about the current events of the past 5 years. We all know a lot more about algorithms now, like a lot more. It's a casual topic. Like my mom said the word algorithm, and she refers to the computer as the machine. Like everybody knows about algorithms now. And these trolls know that there is a keyword list or somewhere that they just have to avoid hitting, right? They're not stupid. They're awful. They're garbage people. But they're not stupid, or at least they're not that kind of stupid. I'm sure they're stupid in other areas, or at least I'd like to believe that. I mean, they are fascists. They can't be that wise, really, when it comes down to it. They picked a very bad system. But ultimately, you cannot. So this is a thing that I say a lot to colleagues, and more computer science colleagues get very frustrated with me, but I think it's true. You cannot machine learn human problems away. You cannot create a bot that will ensure that people act good. You cannot fundamentally give deeply human problems over to a computational system and expect good results because humans are too complex. Machine learning, we treat it like it is this universal panacea. It is nonsense guessing that we only sort of understand, and the classifiers that work the best are the ones we don't actually understand how they work at all. Machine learning has been very valuable in some situations, but we try to apply it to everything, and that's not going to work. We need human beings to be looking at this. And like you said, you can get it escalated, at least at Facebook, to the point where a human being will look at it. But which human being? What kind of training do they have? And what conditions are they working under? You know, a lot of people would assume Facebook's outsourcing the moderation to someone who just doesn't care about trans people, right? Maybe. Or maybe Facebook told this person, you don't get a bonus, and the bonus in these situations is always the thing that brings it up to a level of pay where you can actually like eat on, because these are very poorly paid positions. You only get your bonus if you do, you know, X amount in an hour. And if you're looking at an appeal for more than 5 seconds, you're not doing a good job. How the hell are you supposed to understand the nuances of hate speech in 5 to 10 seconds? You can't.
Yeah. If you don't look at the original post, you're not going to know, like, you're not going to see the context. They might just be saying crazy shit into the void. You don't know if English isn't your native language, or even if it is, but there are so many typos. This is like a paragraph long and there are no commas or periods. I got through a sentence and a half before I gave up and said, sure, it's fine.
Yeah, like a machine learning system or a person working really fast is gonna miss key nuances. So I keep talking about TikTok. I'm doing a lot of TikTok lately. I've become bored with a lot of other platforms. And there's a lot of trans people on TikTok right now. One thing that I report, and it always comes back, this isn't hate speech. Why'd you report this as hate speech? People with accounts where when you go and look at their accounts, they're very obviously anti-Semitic, just like to come into my comments and just casually ask, hey, are you Jewish? And I know, and most other people know, that is the beginning of an anti-Semitic tirade, right? We know that no one is coming into my comments and asking me if I'm Jewish because, like, they really want to have a spiritual discussion. That's not a thing that happens to me. They're coming in and they're setting up a beachhead for them to make more anti-Semitic comments, and then for them to invite all of their friends to make anti-Semitic comments. Well, friends, to the extent any of these people are actually friends with each other. I suspect deeply that they all hate each other too.
That wildly does show more like due diligence than I usually see. Usually, like, the anti-Semitic rant comes out of nowhere. And it's like, obviously anti-Semitism is always bad, but this person's not Jewish. Like,
I mean, that's a key. That's always like a thing in the back of my mind. Like, well, I mean, you've made several assumptions that are incorrect, but still, don't be anti-Semitic to anybody. TikTok has the way they do moderation, they have no basis for understanding that that statement means something, right? You know, if this moderator's never had anything anti-Semitic hurled at them, there are parts of even in America where you can go your entire life without meeting a Jewish person. Maybe they have no context whatsoever, and they're the one making the decision. All of this is fixable, right? All of this is fixable by investing more time in training, by letting people have a lot more time to review each case and like do a proper review on each case, by having more human moderators. We can do all of these things. We really can. And I'm not saying it needs to go out over to humans entirely. There is a class of things, mostly around explicit images, that honestly humans should not be exposed to if we can possibly avoid it.
I mean, wasn't there a study done on people who actually worked with like explicit images, videos, hate speech, that kind of thing? And like these people who had to review all these were just like, they'd burn out after a couple months, or they'd like get converted to the far right. Like it just destroys your brain and like your emotions.
Significant and importantly, lasting psychological damage. It's not just like you take a break and you're fine. This traumatizes people. And like, that's what machine learning's for, right? Machine learning is great at that. And, kudos to Facebook. Their image processing, Facebook, people outside of computer science don't know this. They've contributed more to like image processing than most people at this as of late, because they have been really trying to take all of that out of human hands. It's the right thing to do. But like a determination of, say, who gets to say queer, that can't be left to a machine learning thing, nor can it be left to an untrained person who's got 5 seconds. We need solutions that allow either local control. That's the thing I wrote about in one of my recent papers. You can go the local control route, which is an algorithm flags things and moderators in a group have complete control over what gets removed or not. Facebook works kind of like that, but they still do a lot of top-down, like, we're not even going to let them on check on that one. We don't like that word, which causes a lot of problems in queer communities.
Yeah. I was sent to Facebook jail because somebody made a joke post that was like, it was track related, because of course it was, that blank character would watch you get punched and laugh while it happened. And one of my friends commented and tagged me in it, "You'd totally watch me get punched." And then I commented, like very much joking, "No, I'd be the one punching you." I appealed the decision, but I got sent to Facebook jail for 3 days. I then had to text this friend because I was like, "Hey, I did reply to your comment. I'm not being rude. I got sent to Facebook jail." And he's like, "Oh my God, what did you do? Like, what did you say?" I was like, "I said that I'd be the one punching you." He's like, "Well, of course you would." I fully understand that out of context, that is just threatening violence. If they were just overzealous and taking everything down, that'd be great. Except they're not.
They're really not.
YouTube seems to have humans going through things, because I made a I made a video debunking a bunch of harmful COVID-19 vaccine myths. We would state the myth and then say, like, this is why it's false. Like, this is why the vaccine is actually safe. This is where the myth comes from. Or no, this myth is just complete bogus. We have no idea where it originated. It's just out there for some reason. But that video got taken down by YouTube. I did an appeal, and within 9 hours it was resolved. I had a huge panic attack though, because I was like, oh my God, YouTube's going to hate me now. This is my one pandemic hobby. Please don't take it away.
YouTube is often better about this stuff. And I think that is partially because they have a lot more experience. They've been doing this for a lot longer, right? They had to worry about copyright takedowns very early in their history. And I think that set them up to think about context a little bit more, because you did have to, there was a point where they really had to put a process together for determining, okay, what is artistic merit? When is this not a copyright issue because there's artistic merit to it?
What's fair use?
Exactly. Right. And I suspect the fact that they had to do that means they're better at context overall. Whereas Facebook, I guarantee you that post, the person who made a determination, if it was even a person, did not see the rest of the thread. It was just your post. And it was like, well, threatening violence. This is an obvious community guidelines violation. They have no concept of joke because they have no context. I mean, think about how many key parts of human interaction depend entirely on the context. Or else, especially like, I don't know, queer relationships tend to have, at least in my observation, more playfulness to them. And
I would agree with that.
If that playfulness gets us in trouble, because you kind of, sometimes our playfulness in isolation sounds horrible. You need to hear the rest of the conversation to realize that this is fun jokes between friends. And a machine learning system doesn't even necessarily understand conversation as a concept. It just understands these are words. I have to classify these words, and they look a lot like the bad words.
Queer people are so used to coded language and finding ways to say things so that someone not in the know won't understand it. And then we took it way too far. Like, if you are attracted to a woman, the proper way to say that is, I would let her run me over with her car. Or if you mildly disagree with someone, or they are annoying you a little, or they made a bad pun that you appreciate, your way of expressing appreciation for the bad pun is to say, I will murder you in your sleep.
Yeah, and that's stuff that platforms don't get. Like, they do not get that context. That's why I'm a big fan of the local control model. I like the idea of algorithms being there to flag things and humans being the ones that make the decisions. And I like the idea of it being at the group level, because that keeps it more manageable. But that also might mean, I wrote a whole paper about this. It has to be linked with other systems too, right? We also need to pay or somehow compensate group moderators. They do a lot of the platforms work for them, and people deserve compensation.
Facebook moderators and admins, like, Facebook groups already have a phenomenal way of patrolling themselves. Every group that I'm in that I enjoy has a team of moderators and admin who do incredible work, unpaid incredible work, I might add. And most groups that are responsible set it up so if you type in mod, one of them will see it, will check it, and will usually yeet the offending party out of the group. And if we just better vetted group moderators and paid group moderators, and it wouldn't even have to be that much. Right now, they're doing it for free.
Yeah, I think it'd be not nearly as expensive as platforms claim it would be. And I think that I think part of what I like about it is an outgrowth of, like you said, what's already happening, right? I mean, I do some work in this area, and you're right. The moderators and mins have this incredibly sophisticated setup. And what really impresses me is that it's done without much help from the platform.
Yeah.
My main line is studying folk theories, and they're running on nothing but folk theories most of the time. They have no confirmation of anything from the platform, and yet they've sussed out how it works well enough to make really good decisions and adapt really, really well. I mean, mods and admins on social media impress me. They impress me because they are working so hard and doing such a good job with no support from the platform, and the platform often working against them, questioning them, double checking their judgment, and then deciding, this whole group has to go, actually.
Oh yeah, the number of times I've seen like reminders in groups like, hey, reminder, don't use the Facebook report to admin button. because that doesn't go to us, that goes to Facebook. If they get too many of those, they will just shut the group down because it's a bother. You like type these specific words instead, because the platform is literally working against us and not paying us to do their work for them.
Exactly. And those systems are even more dangerous than you might think, because that is how we get things like brigading, right? This is how we get into situations where a completely innocuous post by a person who has a minority identity becomes the report that ends their entire account because enough people falsely report it. I mean, we do live in a world right now where if you get enough false reports, it doesn't matter if they're false. You still get your platform taken away from you.
Oh, yeah.
That's the expedient thing. They really do just want the problem to go away. And again, this is a symptom of these companies being run by incredibly privileged, wealthy people. They are used to living a life where if a thing bothers you, you just make it go away.
And it's crazy to me because it's like they can't conceive that internet harassment exists. Like there's always a story about a fight or drama between two people on the internet, and one person sends all their fans to falsely report the other person, usually a smaller creator, usually someone they don't actually know in person. And that person's Facebook or Instagram will just be wiped. And I mean, I live in fear of that happening to me because like I've never been in an internet fight with anyone, but I wish I were that cool. I'd probably get more subscribers out of it. But like most of my photos are only stored on Facebook. Like I don't have the hard drive space for that. Like it's how we communicate. It's where we put our memories. Like your photos timeline is like a photo album.
I mean, this is why a core part of the drumbeat I am always after in all my community spaces and academia is social media is real life. Social media is real life. It is important to people in a way that is not frivolous. It is not just for entertainment. I mean, I can tell you about different studies I've done, but the core of it is that I haven't done a study in 6 years where I didn't discover at least one person who Facebook in particular was a crucial thing for them. Right? Because it's the only way they can contact their family, which is scattered across the world, because it is the only place where they feel safe being queer, because they can lock down privacy settings very well on that platform. This is not an optional thing for most minority people. This is not a frivolous thing for most people, period. And unfortunately, the only people who really get to treat it like it's frivolous are the people that own and run it.
Yeah. So you mentioned your personal research there. Could you tell me a little bit more about your recent and current research projects?
Yeah. So right now I'm working on a couple things, actually. I'm working on a project on trans feminine use of TikTok, a kind of creator-based project. I try to do as much member research as possible. I don't really love going into spaces where I'm just a guest, essentially. I like to put my dues in, join the space. So I spent a lot of time making myself a proper TikTok creator and building a following. And now I'm running some work on what is essentially an attempt to make the platform better for trans feminine creators, which in the process would make it better for a lot of minority creators, honestly. There tends to be a lot of overlap. I study trans femme people most because it is what I know the most and where I have the most available sample. But you could do this with anybody and you'd find very similar things, I think. And there we're talking a lot about what happens when a platform genuinely tries to protect people, but still does it in a very patriarchal way. You wind up with things like protective limiting mechanisms, screwing with people's accounts overall, right? You get attacked by a ton of people in the comments on a certain TikTok. TikTok limits your distribution. No more attackers will see you. No more people will attack. Except A, that's not how attacks work. Once the beachhead is out there, there's usually someone directing it. So that's not actually going to help. And B, you've just silenced the trans woman, right? This is why it's so important to think these things through at the design level. Because I understand. They probably did legitimately sit there and think, the best way to protect someone is to stop anyone else from attacking them, right? Like it has the seed of that Okay, you were trying. You were genuinely trying to help.
But it's very victim blamey.
That's the thing. It's still a bunch of cis white men making these decisions. So they're like, well, if we quiet the whole problem down,
I mean,
if we stop the hysterics.
That reminds me of like a job I had where a manager was being very creepy to a young woman who was a new hire. He was her manager on a project. It was not the first time he had been creepy to a young woman at that company. As a result, she was moved off the project.
Got that same overall flavor. It's
let's punish the person who's being attacked. And I know that it's easier. Like if one person is being attacked by hundreds of people, it's really easy. It's way easier to limit that person's reach and say you did something than limit the hundreds of other smaller accounts.
That's the thing. I mean, regardless of the why, and I always like to be mindful of the why, but sometimes you have to put the why aside and talk about actual effects. Okay, maybe it was good. Maybe it was all good reasons. Maybe it was all, people really trying to help. But in the end, what that does is deliver the message that being trans causes trouble, doesn't it? Maybe you should be less trans. That's the message it ultimately wants delivering in this case. I don't think that's intentional, but at a certain point, if you're a multinational company, I don't give a single shit about your intent. What did you do? Yeah. And what you did was silence a bunch of trans women.
And effect matters more than intent, always.
Unless you're trying to figure out what kind of murder to charge someone for, intent is of less interest to me than effect most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's why nonprofits love their mega donors, even though the mega donors are only donating for PR. It's still a bunch of money going to whatever nonprofit. I mean, and we do this in real life, but as you say, social media is real life. We say, oh, well, I didn't mean to offend you. Therefore, you're the worst for saying that for saying that what I did was harmful. And it's like, okay, you harmed someone though. That's the focus.
Yeah, there's this, I mean, amongst the most privileged in our society, but I guess most societies, there is that strong impulse that seems to exist that making someone apologize or recognize that they've done something wrong is always the worst thing you can do. Far worse than whatever they did. And I mean, platforms often operate like that sometimes. I lost my temper a little bit at an event on gender and sexuality equity in my larger field. And one thing that I probably shouldn't have said as a very junior person, but did say very loudly and forcefully is you don't get a cookie for doing the right thing once you've screwed up. You get a cookie if you do something extra nice on top of what you had to do to begin with. But yeah, you don't get a cookie just for being basically decent. That's not how this works. And some white men got very, very mad at me, but that's every day. And it sometimes when you're dealing with like platform management, it really does seem like they're coming from a place that is very much like, we put a moderation system in. Why are you still complaining? When you want moderation? It's like, yeah, okay. We wanted protection. We didn't want to get beaten down. There's a difference.
I wanted to stop hearing the baby crying. I didn't want you to move her to the other end of the house. I wanted you to maybe feed the baby, rock the baby, comfort the baby, change the baby.
Right. The right solution for the problem, not just any solution for the problem. Now, what's funny about that is most of the people I'm complaining about here would absolutely, my guess, send the nanny with the baby to the other side of the house also. Unless rich people are raising their own kids now. Last I checked, that's not the way it works.
I did once move the puppy to the other room, but she's still out of bed. And, it was 3 a.m. and I'd already given her food, water, and a potty break.
I'd put Julian out of my room a few times when he's just been like whacking me in the face in the middle of the night. He did not like it. Not like it at all.
Also, unlike babies, puppies won't die if you do that. They'll just calm down. Could you discuss your research into trans femme TikTok creators a little more specifically? Are you studying specific creators and doing deep dives into them as case studies? Are you trying to get more broad statistics and patterns? Like, what does that research look like?
So the one I'm doing right now is an interview study. I have a bunch of tools in my toolkit, but interviewing remains the most important, partially because there's a lot of things you can do in an interview flexibility wise that's hard to do in other formats, partially because I've been professionally interviewing people since I was 14 years old, so I'm pretty damn good at it at this point. I marched into the local newspaper at 14 and was like, I want a job. I was a weird kid. But then again, they were weird adults because they were like, okay, 14-year-old, here's a desk.
Where are you from? This seems like a 60s sitcom. I'm
from Western Connecticut, and I was as surprised that it worked as anybody else. They assigned me a story about ice cream, and I went and did it, and it was actually very fun. And this was a time in Connecticut where you could get a lot of traction on being like, did you know that there's ice cream flavors white people don't know about? It was a Brazilian ice cream shop that had opened up that I wrote my first ever like publicly published story about. And man, the people of Western Connecticut were like, oh my God, let's look at these new flavors. This is wild. But yeah, so I use interviews as my main tool a lot of the time because it is extremely useful. But I don't just interview, right? I usually do a little drawing exercise too, because it helps people shake loose stuff that they know, but they don't think they know. Everybody's got a little bit of latent knowledge in the back of their head that I like to shake loose before we start talking. And drawing exercise really helps with that. But this one is a setup for some other stuff, right? I don't really do surveys. A lot of people start with surveys to set things up, but I need to talk to the person. I want to get more context. And this one, I got a group of, I think it's 18, probably going to get a few more, but 18 right now. Trans femme creators, you had to have over 1,000 followers because that's pretty much the threshold for most creator stuff. Like that's when you can join the Creators Association and that kind of thing, because it just demonstrates that you're actually trying to build a following, right? If you have 100 followers, it could just be like, because 100 people thought you were cute, and my questions aren't going to make any sense because you're like, yeah, I mean, every once in a while I post videos of myself and they're cute. I don't really care what happens. Not what we're trying to do, right? And these were kind of very in-depth interviews. They usually went for like an hour or more, usually more like 90 minutes. And we really just dived into, why are you doing this? What happens when you do this? What are the problems? What are the best things? What are the worst things? When I start a new line of inquiry, I really try to go broad because I don't want to make the assumption that I know what's going on, right? The heart of qualitative work, in my opinion, is the ability to convince yourself that you might not have the answers already, which is very much the opposite of how it works in, more quantitative scientific disciplines, right? You got to have a hypothesis that you're feeling pretty good about and then test it, or else you just wasted a bunch of money, didn't you? Whereas, hey, I got $25 to pay you, and I just want to kind of talk about your experiences, and I can really dig into what is this person's lived experience. I mean, in a lot of ways, my job is to examine people's lived experiences and provide recommendations based on that. I mean, that's a lot of what my job boils down to. There's actually a lot to that. This one, the goal is essentially to provide a set of recommendations to TikTok or whatever platform would like to take them and run with them. There will be other platforms in the future that need design guidance as to how you can avoid the problems, like causing the problems that trans women in specific see on this app. Eventually, I'll expand that out to other groups of trans people, and then eventually queer community in general. But I'm starting with trans femme people, as I often start with either trans femme people, queer people in general, or women in general, depending on what the scope needs to be, because we need to study the most marginalized people first. Study a bunch of non-marginalized people, and they're going to tell you, yeah, this works great. End of study. Guess we don't have to change anything. Study marginalized people, and you will solve all of the problems that the non-marginalized people didn't even realize they had, plus the actual problems that are hurting marginalized people really badly. This study is interesting because I've studied Facebook, Twitter, a lot of other platforms previously. It's my first study on TikTok. And it's interesting studying a platform that people still love and that people still feel hopeful about. If you study Facebook, no one's hopeful about Facebook. The most common thing I hear from participants is, yeah, I hate this. I hate this. This is the worst website on the internet. But I mean, like my grandmother's here and I can't just stop sending her messages, something along those lines. Whereas TikTok, I hear a lot of things about why it's so great on its own merits. Not this is the only place I can build a following, but rather this is where I want to build a following. And that has allowed a level of reflection among the participants that is rare, right? They're not as clouded by anger as some of the people in my previous studies. And so let me zoom into things. I'm going to be able to my papers comes from this is going to have a lot of very specific recommendations for TikTok or anybody else, and pretty implementable because, hey, it turns out trans women as a group pretty good at thinking through this stuff. We have an outsized presence in computer science for reasons, I guess. I don't know. My hope right now is that by bringing forward that lived experience in a format that, is a little bit more business and research friendly, we can actually get some change to happen. I mean, that's a lot of what I'm aiming for is to actually have things changed on platforms. I can't force that, but they do. I mean, I publish places where they pay attention. TikTok I'm hopeful for because they approached me. I didn't have to go to them. A couple years back, when I was presenting my folk theory stuff for the first time at a conference in Scotland, some TikTok security dudes came up to me afterwards and were very interested, which is a good sign, right? I have to chase Facebook people down. Twitter people often come to me, but then they're like, oh, cool, never do anything. We'll see what happens with TikTok. So, I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing in this project. And then the next project that I'm actually recruiting my research staff for is a really cool project that an old friend and I are doing. We're neither of us, so I'm a lesbian, she's bisexual, and neither of us are very happy with the state of women-loving women dating apps. They're nonsense for the most part. They don't work very well, and they certainly don't work very well for people that aren't cisgender.
Accurate.
Yeah, right. And we are trying to essentially use a design method that some friends and I developed 2 years ago to run this multi-layered summer design challenge, basically, where we will bring in a bunch of trans women, non-binary women, and non-binary people generally that are kind of under the women-loving women umbrella. There's some dispute over like where the line of lesbian would be with non-binary. I tend to be very inclusive on that. I don't think
the spaces that are the non-toxic spaces tend to say anyone but cis men who choose to identify as lesbians get to be lesbians because the history is so expansive.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
we're basically gonna do a thing where we do design inquiries on what people need, and we're going to do it in layers, right? We're going to work basically in reverse order of marginalization. We will often start with trans women, and especially trans women of color, and then we'll get to a point where we have a very solid statement of like, this has to happen on this platform in this way, or it won't work for this group. And then the next group that's a little bit less marginalized layers on top of that while still keeping the core of what's there, right? So it's not a question. So by the end, it won't be a question of, well, what works as a dating platform for cis lesbians? It will be a bunch of cis lesbians being posed the question, well, we already know what is necessary for trans lesbians, for non-binary bisexuals, for all these other groups, keeping in mind that you do still have to account for these groups. What do you need wrapped around this, right? We're kind of trying a new thing of, with different layers of inquiry, can we literally keep the needs of the most marginalized centered? Like literally.
I think there's a myth that is very pervasive that you can't center the most marginalized voices without just, I guess, for lack of a better term, screwing over everyone else, and especially the second most marginalized voices. There's always but what about the cis people who are queer with trans people, or whenever you are talking about issues that face the Black community? Well, what about the other people of color? What about and if you're talking about people of color, well, what about white people who are poor? And I mean, this has been a thing throughout history, like marginalized communities eating each other. And I think your work attempting to, instead of doing that, actually make something that works is very impressive, and I really hope it works out.
I mean, that really is the hope, because honestly, I mentioned earlier I grew up in Connecticut, and I'm not going to say this is like true for everyone that grew up in Connecticut, but it did give me a chance to grow up in a place where I did see a lot of different kinds of people, like at my high school and stuff. Like it was not unusual to encounter and be friends with and really get to know people that were radically different than you. And not everybody gets that opportunity. And I think it's an important opportunity because it left me in a place as an adult where I hear the arguments that you've been talking about, but honestly, they don't make any sense to me on like a heart gut level. Right? It doesn't make any sense to me that the struggles of a Black trans woman could somehow endanger my rights. We both need rights.
Yeah.
And me fighting for a Black trans woman's rights is not only the right thing to do, but is also a fight for my own rights.
Gay marriage was only passed because the discussion changed dramatically after Stonewall, a riot started by a Black trans woman throwing bricks at cops. So the idea that all of these white cis gay people have that like trans and bi people are, I mean, it's usually trans and bi people, but the focus more recently has shifted to being anti-trans. I don't want to claim that oppression because I haven't had to experience it personally. They say, oh, well, you're not helping, you're making us look bad, less acceptable. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like the only thing that made you at all acceptable were the actions of Black trans women fighting for you. So with all respect, read a book and shut up.
Right. People love to forget who started all of this. And they love to, we have this unfortunate thing within the queer community that that a lot of people do seem to think like it was a bunch of cishet white gay men fighting to get married that changed everything. And no, first off, I know marriage equality is really important to a lot of people. That was a poor target. That was a poor target because it secures rights for a very specific thing, for a very bounded group of people. And it required us to throw bisexual people and trans people, but honestly, really more bisexual people than anything else under the bus, right? The legal arguments behind the gay marriage rulings fall apart if you admit that bisexual people are real, because they are all based on, well, we have no choice. When the real argument should be, everyone has whatever the hell choices they want because human beings should be free. Because human beings should be free to love who they want. It shouldn't matter. Now, did I decide to be trans? No, I did not decide to be trans. I was pretty obviously a girl, even though I somehow missed it for 30 years. I don't know. The PhD certifies you as being smart in a very specific thing, not generally. It's important to remember.
Well, they say the more you stay in academia is you learn more and more about less and less.
Accurate. But like, it shouldn't matter if I decided I was trans or if I just was trans. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter at all. And same thing, like, it shouldn't matter if you decided you were gay or you just were gay, right? The bottom line should have been, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this at all. So it shouldn't matter how they got from point A to point B, because point B is valid no matter how you got there. I don't want to call it a betrayal, but that tactical decision to basically secure the rights of cisgender gay men and lesbians, and by and large white ones, that were willing to like assimilate into communities. It was progress, but it was progress that has left us with a legacy of internal strife that I really worry about.
And all of those old arguments are now just being repurposed and retargeted. Like, the arguments against gay people for so long were saying it was inappropriate for children, comparing them to pedophiles, like the predatory lesbian was coming for your girls. And now gay people, specifically able-bodied cis gay people, have the right to get married. And by the way, for anyone wondering, marriage equality is still not a thing, because when you get married, you lose your disability benefits. So many people with disabilities cannot afford to get married and also live. Thing we should fix. The language that was used for so long to target all queer people is now, okay, well, we can't be mad at these people because the conversation has shifted. So now we're going to actively target trans people and non-binary people and bisexual people because instead of attacking the arguments, the strategic decision, I guess, if it was a decision, was made to try to work within those arguments. And instead of saying the idea that people are only doing this is predatory, is flawed in general, it's just not us. We're not the ones doing it to be predatory, rather than attacking the entire argument as bullshit.
This is the trap. This is the trap that groups have fallen into throughout history. That notion that, well, if I can be good enough in the eyes of the dominant group, I can't save everyone like me, but I can save myself. Yeah, that's how you become the court jester at best, right? That's not actual equality for anybody. It's not even equality for you, even though you got your individual rights, because you are always conditional. They can always be taken away. Rights are kind of an all or nothing thing when it comes down to it. Either everybody has the right, or some people are allowed to practice the right, but never actually have it because it could be taken away at any moment. And you're right. We see the exact same rhetoric being thrown at trans people as we did at queer people more generally back in the 90s. And it's kind of extra absurd now because, like, they're still trying to do like the, like sexual deviant thing. And it's like, yeah, most of us want some pretty mild stuff. I'm like a cuddling and kissing person. Like, yeah, obviously it goes further eventually, but I'm not out here doing anything crazy. And even if people are, that's kind of their business. Like, the entire thing rings hollow because they are A, making accusations that they don't actually know anything about, and B, they're making accusations that shouldn't even work as accusations. You want to do some weird stuff? Go for it. Like human beings have an incredibly short lifespan on this planet. You should probably do what you want in that area.
Yeah. Also, it's just absurd because the predatory group became the victim group. Like, it was, oh, these predatory lesbians are coming for your straight women, to, oh, these predatory trans lesbians are coming for your predatory lesbians. And it's like, what?
Maybe that's what I need to do. I need to find myself a good old fashioned predatory lesbian and we can prey on each other. That's my new dating plan.
It's just,
it is absurd. It is absolutely, it's interesting we're talking about this today on like Lesbian Day of Visibility, because it's even turned around, like that same rhetoric, we're already seeing it turned back around even on cis lesbians, right? There are now people within the queer community that are really nasty towards cis lesbians using almost exactly the same language that people were nasty about queer people in general back in the 90s. And it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. We keep turning on each other. And
the important thing is that I'm a predator again, though, right? I like being a predator.
I suppose in the argumentation, yeah, you would qualify.
I really don't want anyone to find out just how much of a rule follower I am. I have a reputation to maintain, which is why, of course, I asked for your approval that I was a good enough predator.
Well, you have my approval. I think this is part of why I do my work the way I do my work. A lot of queer work, not all, but a lot of queer work, especially more theoretical queer work, is these little inter-community feuds, and it all comes down to being about like how queer people can get along and all that stuff. I design studies that have a distinct component of reminding everybody, so we just disagreed for a week. There are people out there who literally want to erase and kill all of us, though, so we got to get our shit together in a unified front. My last paper that I published actually very explicitly says that we do not have the numbers to be fighting amongst ourselves. We have got to provide a unified front to the world of cishet design, or else nothing is going to change. We need to operate as a block. I mean, we have gone so far into this individualism place, especially through queer theory, but also through our own behaviors. We are, queer people in general like diversity. I think that's fair to say, right? There's a lot of different types of queer people. We like the ability to explore widely, but that doesn't mean we can give up a group identity. It's nowhere near time for that. We have not made the progress that we seem to think we have, and everything we have made can be very easily taken away from us. So whenever I see queer community infighting, honestly, this is how I cope now. I designed a study to try to solve it. This is, admittedly, research is sort of a coping mechanism for me at times. If I feel like I need to do something about a problem and don't know what to do about it personally, I may design a study on it, and occasionally the federal government may fund it. It's weird.
I mean, that's way better than my coping mechanism. I make a YouTube video. For example, when I freak out about anti-vaxxers, I decide to read the entirety of like the CDC and FDA and Mayo clinics and all of their ideas. And then I go read a bunch of crazy shit. And I try to determine where anti-vaxxers came from, which leads me down an awful rabbit hole of like terrible medical practices against minority communities. And the whole thing is just really bad for my mental health. It's just a very long doom scroll that ends with an informational dump that a few people watch. So the fact that yours gets funded is very impressive.
I'm just hoping it continues. I'm in a position I never thought I could be in because I never thought it would exist. I'm on a 2-year fellowship provided by the National Science Foundation and the Computing Research Association. And it is explicitly for me to do a bunch of studies on queer and trans people. When I started my PhD in 2015, I would have told you that a position like that could never exist. And here I am having it. That's new. And it gives me a little bit of hope that the people who are nominally in charge of the future of computing see the value in this work. And, I want to recognize that I'm not the first person to do this kind of work. People have been trying to do this kind of work for a long time, and some of them have even succeeded. But it's only now that we're getting the kind of institutional support where we can actually make large-scale differences. You can't make a large-scale difference on, $1,000 here, $1,000 there. You can start to make a difference if you're told you have 2 years to do nothing but work on this, and we will give you whatever support you need. It's a very different thing. And I'm lucky enough to be in it right now. And I keep that's the thing I keep thinking about, right? That's the thing that pops into the back of my head a lot of the time. Just like, everything is terrible and on fire, but we are taking steps to probably not cut out the notion of everything being on fire, but reduce the number of things that are on fire and make them less problematically on fire. They'll still be on fire, but it will be sort of like a fire that we know what to do about, maybe, and can
like
keep
a red flame, not a blue flame, like just a slightly less hot fire, like 2nd-degree burns, not 3rd-degree burns.
Exactly. And like, it sounds facetious, but at the same time, it is like, well, 2nd-degree burns are more treatable than 3rd-degree burns, aren't they? Nobody's happy that they're getting burned, but if you really think about it, you should probably be pretty happy that it's not a 3rd-degree burn, right? And unfortunately, there's always that backlash of like, well, maybe nobody should have burns. And I'm just sitting here like, well, of course nobody should get burned. In a perfect world, nobody would get burned ever. That's bad. It hurts.
Mitigate. We're mitigating.
Right? It's like, I love a utopian fantasy in a fiction novel. In the real world, I have to fix the systems that people depend on, because pulling the rug out from under them and then being like, we're liberating you. We made a better platform. You just need to spend 2 years investing in it and, maybe help us keep building it out because it's not totally built. And, oh, yeah, it doesn't work with screen readers because we didn't have anybody that, had vision issues on our staff when we were doing it. But you'll figure that out, right? You can program your own screen reader. Like, there's all these asks that is create a new thing. And it is always like the most privileged queer people that get to spend their entire lives saying activist shit that are coming out like, well, we should just burn all this down and start again. This is our world. We live in this world. We're part of it. We don't need another world. We need to assert our place in this one and enforce it.
See, that kind of talk about only mitigating problems and not fully erasing them, that reminds me, a privileged cis gay, that the world isn't perfect. And I haven't had to face that for like several days now. And I really feel like, is this what discrimination feels like? I really feel like you're attacking me. And I just want it to go away. So I'm going to report your comment.
Exactly. This is exactly what happens. I mean, this is the thing. Takedowns still happen in groups where we have vetted everybody very well. And we're pretty sure nobody's a troll pretending to be queer. Still a lot of fights, still a lot of takedowns. That's because we've got work inside the community to do. I am dreading checking my TikTok mentions because like I did a Lesbian Day of Visibility post this morning and those never go well in the comments. Because I know there's going to be a bunch of people, there can be a bunch of TERFs saying, you're not a lesbian. It's like, my views on girls and my relations with them suggest that, yes, I am.
If it makes you feel better, TERFs don't think I'm a lesbian either. And I'm a cis woman married to a cis woman. So like, they're just hypocritical shits.
At a certain point, I just want to like take them by the shoulders and shake them and be like, how much gayer do you need this to be? Like, how much gayer do you need this to be to take it seriously? I don't see how you get more lesbian than two women. Like that's, come on. It's frustrating because I'll come back though to half TERF stuff and half inter-community stuff.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, like, why did you have to spotlight lesbians today? Lesbians are the worst part of the gay community, and it's like we're not actually. We're really not. But a lot of people have a very difficult time. Even queer people have a very difficult time accepting the notion that some people might not have any reason whatsoever to center men in their lives ever. I think that is the core problem a lot of people have with lesbianism. By the way, it's very scary for people that aren't lesbians to think that there is a way to live that doesn't center men. Because a lot of other stuff centers men.
I think aside from seeing my dad a couple times over the holidays, because of the pandemic, I haven't been within 6 feet of a man since early March 2020. Yeah. I guess aside from like walking by them on the street, like I have not.
I realized about a month ago, I had a reason to think about this. And I realized I have one cis guy friend that's not a colleague. One. And he is the doting, devoted husband of one of my closest colleagues and friends. And that was very interesting to me. I just kind of sat there and thought, oh, damn, I have no place for men in my life unless it's a professional connection. Like literally none. Just this one guy who loves his wife so goddamn much. Like it's the only one I put up with.
Those are the best type of guys.
Yeah.
And the best type of women. Everybody who loves their wives so goddamn much. I love them.
Right. I appreciate it. But yeah, we've got work to do inside the community. We do. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we need to splinter. We need to unite. And that means some people are going to have to like work through some prejudices, right?
Yeah.
Even within the lesbian community, TERFs exist.
Yeah. And I feel like for those of us who are on the internet, it seems like the majority of lesbians are TERFs. And it's like, no, actually, the majority of us are very chill, very accepting, as shown by the fact that a lot of very TERFy spaces have been shut down. There are very few left. Like when there's a lesbian space that takes a turn for the TERF, it usually doesn't last very long. But TERFs have come up with this narrative that anyone who isn't a TERF isn't a true lesbian. And I'm like, wow, yike.
I mean, I don't dwell too much on that mindset and how it works. I have a friend that does that kind of research. I can't, it'll ruin my day.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being absurd in a way here because I also spend a lot of my day listening to people tell me insanely traumatic stories about what's happened to them online. But still, that's more handleable than me trying to really dig into like, how does a TERF's brain work? That would screw me up for a while and try to have to like have that level of empathy, honestly, with people that
TERF
really
speaking at the Heritage Foundation, like literally speaking at like alt-right hate groups because they're like, yes, you think I shouldn't exist. Yes, you would jail and worse to me if you could, but we are bound together by our common enemy, people we both hate. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you're making connections and prioritizing hatred in your life, there's a reason I do physics. I don't have time for that nonsense.
It's sad to see. It's very sad to see. Honestly, TERFs in particular, a couple things, but TERFs in particular led me to a point a couple of years ago where I decided one of my core design principles that I was going to essentially work into everything is a recognition of Popper's paradox of tolerance. At a certain point, I just had to adopt that because it is true that we can't satisfy everyone. It really is true that we can't satisfy everyone. So who do we need to put on the outs? The people that have it out for literally everybody else. That is a design principle I try to work into everything. Mm-hmm. The one thing we will not tolerate is intolerance. If intolerance is your game, you're gone. I'm not designing a system for you. I have no desire to design a system for you.
That is literally how fascists trick liberals into becoming fascists.
Yeah.
They say, well, you don't intolerate my intolerance, therefore you're not perfect. And it's like, no, that's a trap.
This is the thing. Everybody should read Popper, not his insane stuff about what a theory is or whatever, but the tolerance stuff. Yes, that stuff is great. Like most philosophers, early hits went really well, kind of went off the rails after that. But that's just how philosophy works, honestly. You get that big hit, and then you think you're going to get creative, and then you write down a bunch of nonsense. As far as I can tell, that's how philosophy works.
I mean, this is why I study physics, which is both the furthest and the closest science to philosophy.
I think people assume I will have more of a tolerance for philosophy than I do, because philosophy does interact with social computing more than most areas of computing. But no, I'm an empiricist. I have standards of evidence that are not the same as like a physicist, but they do have the same rigor in many ways. It has to be practical for the philosophical to make sense for me to integrate. And the paradox of tolerance makes sense.
Yeah.
Closes a giant hole in the argumentation around, well, don't you have to be tolerant of everybody? There's actually one special circumstance that ruins the whole thing if you're tolerant of. I used to just phrase it as like, we don't design for Nazis, but I had to stop saying that because it's not just Nazis. Yes, there are Nazis out there. Like, there are legit Nazis out there now again.
Yeah.
The whole thing. But like, it's not just them. It's not just them. It's much broader now. Fascism is on the rise casually, it seems. This kind of intolerance is not acceptable. And I'll kick a person out of a study for that, right? I am not, when I do big group-based studies, I do not hesitate to kick a participant out if they are, trying to peddle that nonsense. And I'll be very transparent with the other participants why they're gone.
Now that we've talked about casual Nazism, I need a little bit of a pick-me-up. So, come on, Cece. So I'm going to redirect. I'm going to bring in a puppy because every time I have to have a difficult conversation now, I just bring in a puppy. It makes me happy and it makes everyone else happier.
I like that concept.
Yeah, it's like I have some very bad news, but here's a puppy. It makes me happy either way. But let's talk about some really cool things that your research has done, kind of the bright side. You talk about personal social media ecosystems. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about how those actually work online and why they're important and why they're helpful.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed that project. That's a project I did with a close friend of mine, Ashley Walker at Northwestern, and my advisor helped us out with that, Dr. Jeremy Bernholtz, also at Northwestern. And that project, which the overall title of that was Too Gay for Facebook, was a fun paper to write, honestly. There was this problem until very recently. And I harp on trans stuff now. Before I harped on trans stuff, the thing I harped on constantly was, hey, why are you trying to study one social media site at a time? That's not how people use social media. And it was very obvious to me. But when I actually got into grad school and looked through the literature, it was like, oh, like nobody has said this formally. So the first thing I ever published was a paper at my main conference now that was essentially demonstrating, hey, none of this is independent. You cannot study one platform at a time. And that was pretty well received, considering I was a complete unknown, literally getting up in front of a bunch of senior people and saying, actually, everything you've done for the last 10 years was wrong in a crucial way. They handled that surprisingly well, mostly because I think a lot of them had gotten to the point where they were like, do I write this paper? Who's going to write this paper? And then I was like, I'm new. I wrote a paper. And they were very nice about it. But then a few years later, I wanted to follow up in a queer context. And it turned out that was the best illustration of my point I ever could have found. We used a bunch of really cool new techniques that involved a lot of like mapping of people's ecosystems. And by mapping, I don't mean that in the traditional social science, like I'm going to build a social network graph. I mean, literally, I took a giant piece of paper and some markers to all the interviews, and we made a damn map every single time, which was insanely fun, by the way. Drawing exercises get people going in a really unique way. So I use them a lot because they make people think. One of the coolest things we found is how clever queer people are about this. There are so many different ways that queer people not only use privacy controls on platforms, but also privacy affordances across the entire ecosystem of platforms to protect themselves while still being able to express themselves. When we look at this from a one platform point of view, so this is kind of where this becomes important. If you look at one platform at a time, you're essentially looking at a binary. Are you being open or about your identity? Or are you locking things down with the privacy controls? You can maybe break that out into three things. Are you being totally open? Are you being open with a very specific list of people that you've very carefully engineered? Or are you locking everything down? And that's no way to live, really. There's plenty of evidence that it is and I want to be very clear before I say this, lots of people can't be out for very good reasons, especially safety-related reasons.
Yeah. All you closeted people, we love you. We see you. Come out in your own time.
I don't want to worry any of those people we've just addressed, but there is significant psychological evidence that being closeted is harmful to one's own psyche, right? It is not a thing, and I think, every queer person knows that being closeted is not a thing you do because you're really psyched about being closeted. Being closeted is a thing you do because you need to, for the most part. And there's plenty of evidence that suggests that not just being closeted, but not being able to express the fullness of who you are is psychologically damaging in the long term. So that one platform setup, it immediately becomes this thing of you can psychologically damage yourself, or you can put everything out there and hope for the best, which is an absurd thing to tell queer people.
Yeah.
So queer people almost never use one site. I've done this more broadly. Every once in a while, you do find a straight person who's just like, I only use Facebook. Everything is good. I don't need any other site. And it's like, okay, that's not my life, but cool. Good for you. I'm glad you like Facebook. But for queer people, there's always a constellation of sites. And I like the word constellation because it's a shape, right? These aren't haphazard sites. These are, on some level, some people really consciously, some people sort of subconsciously. There's always, part of what the drawing exercise is, there's always this level of distinct thought about it. They have usually found a primary platform. When the time I did the study, it was Facebook, but I don't know if it would be Facebook anymore, honestly. Actually, it'd be age dependent. If I did this on Gen Z, they'd say TikTok is their primary platform, would be my guess. And a smattering of millennials who hang out with Gen Z too much, but also say that. But essentially, you have a base platform, and then you fill the holes that it creates with its technical flaws, right? And you do this not just based on technical stuff, but your perception of where people are and where communities are, right? So maybe you never do anything queer on Facebook that's not in a fully locked down private queer group, right? You're getting those benefits of the queer group on Facebook, but you still don't have the full self-expression capability because telling other queer people that you're queer is not the same as telling your family and the world. It's just not the same thing. And because it's so locked down, because Facebook, for all their flaws, really does give you a way to lock things down. They really have nailed that. If you don't want someone to see something on Facebook, if you know the tools, you can do it. Whether the tools are knowable is a whole separate argument. But okay, so you lock that down. You've got that little bit of queer support. You can still have, grandma and all your super homophobic family without causing a big stink. You can still be in contact with them. But then maybe you have a Twitter. And your Twitter isn't as personally identifying. You could probably figure out who it is if you did a lot of work, but not casually, not in the way like grandma would if she stumbled into Twitter one day. Maybe there, even though it's a platform with no real privacy controls, honestly, it's an all or nothing thing there in an insane way. It's either a fully private account or a fully public thing. There's no middle ground. Maybe because your family would never go on Twitter and nobody that your family knows would ever go on Twitter, that public site is a much safer place for you to publicly be very queer. And maybe, okay, I have a couple work colleagues on Twitter, though, and they don't have a problem with me being a trans lesbian at all. But I did want to talk about this sex thing, and they would have a problem with that. So actually, I have a Tumblr, and it goes on and on like that. And you find these little places where it's the right audience and the right tools to locate a piece of yourself. And through doing this, through multiple sites, I think 3 is the least that happened in the study. Most of the time it was a lot more, to the extent that I was making some very long lists of sites with people, which got kind of absurd. It was like, how do you have time for this? but people do. Through that, you wind up with your social media ecosystem, not any one social platform, but the overall social media as an entity is actually a place where you can express every single bit of the fullness of yourself fully, just not on one site. You have to spread it out. It's sort of a release valve in a lot of ways, right? If you try to put it on one platform, you have all this pressure. Well, one platform is not going to do everything for you. It can't. They're not built that way. And I don't even know how we build them that way. I mean, if we had a blueprint for utopia, I think we'd do it. We just don't. And the ecosystem concept has been very useful to other folks at this point. I mean, one of the coolest things in research is when you get to the point where like other people are building on your theories. And I'm lucky enough that that's happened relatively early. And now people use the social media ecosystem theory as kind of a way to justify why they had to study more than one platform. Very happy to provide that service, but also as a way to talk about identity and how the assumption that identity is singular doesn't even hold on a technical level, right? But similarly, the assumption that the only way to be safe as a queer person is to hide yourself doesn't hold either. We can find technical solutions around it. It's a paper I'm very proud of because of that. The other thing I'm very proud of about that paper is it tacitly makes the case that you can study queer people and get something larger from it. Until very recently, the notion was if you study queer people, those results only apply to queer people. They couldn't possibly transfer to straight people. Meanwhile, studies done on straight white men are assumed to transfer to everyone. And sadly, that includes medical studies. I mean, so many medical studies are just like, yeah, we got a bunch of white men. This will probably work for Black women, right? Now we don't need to check that, do we?
John Oliver did a whole thing about where he brought up that one study for, I think it was a drug to treat ovarian cancer. And the entire study group was cis white men for a drug to treat ovarian cancer.
It is insane what we do. And I was very proud of the fact that I was able to write a paper that people use to talk about ecosystems generally using nothing but a queer sample. There's not a single straight person in there. And the new study that I'm coming out with, my dissertation study, is the exact same way, except this time I don't even talk about it. This is what we do now. Sometimes we study queer people, and that's okay to just study queer people. I'm just asserting it as a fact now, and apparently they're letting me.
That makes me so happy.
When I get depressed about some of the stuff I'm studying, I do think back on what I've already accomplished and what my research partners have already accomplished with me. And it gives me hope, right? I don't want to be naive. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about this at all. Things are incredibly broken. But we're starting to have the tools to fix them. The question is no longer going to be, are we allowed to fix things in many cases? It's going to be, do we have the will to fix things? My answer to that is yes.
On that note of hope, I did a lot of reading of your website to prepare for this interview. And you had one quote that really stuck out to me, mainly because you bolded it. And you say, fundamentally, I believe that social technologies have a tremendous potential for good, which, are you sure? We just had this interview. And then you go on to say, of course, but have thus far been designed and implemented in ways that worsen existing problems while introducing novel challenges to our social processes. And that bit, I definitely agree with, especially after this interview. But could you please explain to me, a person who finds it very easy to lose all hope and fall into a doom spiral, explain why you, who studies social media and exists as a person online, still believes that social media is a fundamentally good thing?
So I've got like two answers to that, right? My answer that I give when I do academic talks and everything really is a lot of what we've been talking about already around how useful these spaces have already proved for minority people in particular. Queer people especially, but really any minority group is probably getting some benefit from platforms that cishet white people might not even see, honestly.
I mean, there are loads of support groups that are for people who deal with homophobia, racism, any type of discrimination like transphobia. And who support each other, lift each other up, and also people who are just trying to work out their identity. Like there are
Yeah.
loads of groups for that with just advice. And I mean, to Trekkies, like there are loads of just groups for people who don't have too many friends in their day-to-day life who are absolutely obsessed with Star Trek. And then you have your group online where you can post memes about Star Trek or just quote Hamilton till the end of time. Like
Yeah, there's these amazing things that happen, and a lot of us experience these amazing things. It's easy to forget how amazing they are because of all the bullshit that surrounds them. But honestly, I have a simpler answer, and this is new. This isn't new. I got really into TikTok about halfway last year, and that has changed my thinking on some things because I spend a lot more time with Gen Z people now, and they are part of why I am so hopeful about this and why I am so certain that this can be turned around. They as a generation are less selfish, and they as a generation are more willing to deal with adversity. Not that millennials didn't deal with adversity, but I think, people, older millennials my age especially, like there was a definite point of depression and giving up in a lot of cases. Whereas Gen Z is just like, yeah, I'm pretty depressed, but I'm not giving up. Screw it. I'm not going to let it get me. There's this sense of like, listen, the world is terrible and we have to fight it amongst Gen Z. It's kind of amazing to see. And I just see what happens when you grow up with these spaces, right? People my age, these spaces didn't exist till I was in college, right? I'm not sure if you have a beat on how old I am, but my Facebook account was started in October 2004 when I was a college student, because you needed to be a college student at, I think, 15 elite colleges. That somehow included mine, even though I didn't think of it as that elite. I went to George Washington University. It's a good school, but I didn't think it would be like in that initial group, but we were. I had a Facebook account since 2004. That's how old I am. I didn't have that when I was a teenager, right? And first off, on a personal level, I do wonder if I had, probably would have realized I was trans like 10 years earlier, which would have really improved my life, honestly. Because there's just certain things you probably really can't even get a start on until you know what your gender situation is sometimes. But when I see, especially when I meet young trans women that are, becoming like TikTok creators, like 18, 19, the confidence they have, the sureness of themselves, the amount of things they've worked through blow me away. And then I interview them. And universally, these were done in online spaces. These were done in online spaces on Facebook, on Twitter, on Tumblr a lot of the time, actually, although unfortunately that's dead. And we see, even with things as bad as they are, I can only speak for the queer community here. I'm not sure how it would work in other minoritized communities, but in the queer community, the fact that these spaces have existed has essentially given an entire generation a 10-year head start on figuring out who they are in the world. That alone would be enough to rebuild and safeguard these platforms. Like, I do what I'm doing for a lot of reasons, but as of late, I keep coming back to, we have the worst possible form of this, and look at all the good it did anyway. What if we had the best possible form? What could we do then? I think we do a lot of good stuff.
Wow. That gave me a lot of hope. Are you trying to single-handedly fix the internet for Gen Z? Is that what's happening? Did you meet Gen Z, fall madly in love, and just dedicate your entire life to fixing the internet for them? It really seems...
Let me put it this way. I had a career laid out in front of me. I'm still doing that career, but my motivations are a lot more urgent than they used to be. Because yes, I did essentially encounter Gen Z en masse and realized, oh, not only are there people I want to fight for now, but like they're willing to do it. When I was fighting for millennial queer people, I love millennial queer people. I date age appropriately, so I'll probably wind up with a millennial queer person. But like, it was a little bit discouraging sometimes to do studies with a bunch of millennials and all of them are like, yeah, I guess we could improve this, but everything sucks anyway, so why should we even bother? Like that, I still want to fight for that person, but it's not like exciting to fight for that person.
I feel so called out.
Right. Well, like I understand the attitude, but at a certain point, if I'm doing like 10 interviews a day and every single one of them ends with like, I'm not even sure why we're talking about this, nothing's going to change. It's a lot more encouraging. And I sped up my work, especially the trans femme project. That wasn't supposed to happen for another couple months, but I fast tracked it because the first 2 interviews I did, it was like, these are people that will act on my recommendations. These are people that care about the change I'm trying to affect. And they're just as invested in it as I am, maybe more so. Some of them are a little bit obsessive maybe one of these kids will start a revolution. I don't know. Like they have the capacity. I don't think millennials were ever going to start a revolution. We're depressed. Gen Z might actually start a revolution. I don't know. They're like, it's not that they don't get how bad the world is. Their eyes are totally open. They're just like resilient to it and are going to keep fighting. And yeah, I mean, I'm not on like a crusade to fix the internet on a literal level, but my motivations are definitely in that space. And a lot of the work I'm doing on TikTok in particular is kind of for Gen Z. When you're like a faculty academic, one of the interesting things is that you spend a lot more time with younger people than you. And some of my colleagues find that extremely annoying. I find it extremely inspiring. Then again, I also understand memes better than most of my colleagues. So maybe that helps. I don't know. I mean, I'm non-neurotypical, so I have always had a densely packed, layered way of speaking that I have to like disambiguate for people. And then Gen Z comes along and is like, oh yeah, I made a tiny little GIF that means 12 different things, and you only know them if you've read obscure things. And I'm just like, that's how I think. Okay. We're both the same level of dense crazy. I can get into this. It's inspiring to meet an 18-year-old that has had the resources to get where I am as a 35-year-old. That's impressive. And I don't want those resources to go away. I want them to be more available to more people.
So you've told me what your motivations are now, like what really drives you to accelerate your study. What made you want to pursue social computing as a field of study originally? The way you spoke implied that you chose this field before you transitioned. Is that correct? Or
That's correct. Yeah, I transitioned during grad school. I mean, transition is not a thing that ever really ends, honestly. But yeah, I started during grad school. So I've always been a queer person. This is like a sticking point for me. It's funny. Someone called me a baby trans the other day, and it was like, I came out as gender fluid and bisexual when I was 19 years old. Okay, I'm 35 now. I've been not cis for a very long time. When I talk about transition, I really am talking about like, you're not any of these complicated things. You're just a lady. Like that was the revelation in the end for me. It was the very simple revelation of like, oh, you're not anything newfangled at all. You're just a lady. You're just a good old fashioned lady. Like that was my big point. And that was like physical transition and everything. But even before all that, like I was never a cis or het person. I identified as bisexual at that time. I don't anymore because listen, I don't know how this happened, but like 2 months into hormones, I attempted to be like, think about guys. And it was just like, my brain was just like, no, that's not a thing anymore. It's like, well, okay. Oh, interesting. So I spent a lot of time when I was doing my master's and everything as someone who identified as gender fluid and bisexual. Even then I saw these potentials, right? I saw these potentials and I got really into social media myself. I'm a person who's extremely online is the way I often put it. And when I realized that I had a talent for research, it was the natural fit to start to do research in that direction, especially because it is only in the last 10 years or so that someone that's not like a highly technical person can make an amazingly huge contribution to computing, right? This is a new thing. I don't code that often. I can, but you wouldn't want me to code your production system, nor would you want me to teach basic computer science, because I'm going to teach them all sorts of wrong shit that you're going to be mad at in the more advanced classes.
Please say you document. Please say you document your code.
I mean, when I code, but I don't code that often, right? The fact that I could have an impact on computing, and I encountered people that made me realize I could have an impact on computing without becoming a programmer. I could use my existing interviewing and kind of more psych-based skills to have a huge impact on computing. That's kind of what led me there. And I got very lucky, honestly. The one queer professor at my undergraduate institution, when I was a master's student at the same institution, basically pulled me aside and was like, so I notice you don't seem to know why you're doing this master's. You're just doing it as a thing to do. I've had you in my class several times. You could do this. You could do research professionally. And that had never really occurred to me because as a journalism student, I was a journalist before I did all this. As a journalism student, I've been hammered into me so many times. Don't tell them that you're gender fluid. Well, don't tell them that you're bi, and certainly don't even mention the word gender fluid. They're going to see that as bias. It's bias. Having an identity is bias. And she was the first person that said, well, no, let me tell you about what qualitative work is and how having an identity is what makes you better at it than most people. And that was like a really important thing, having a queer professor tell me that it will not be a problem that you're queer. It will actually be something that helps you do better work. I got lucky. If I don't know what the hell I'd be doing right, I'd probably still be trying to be a journalist and probably wouldn't have a job at all, honestly, because I also can't shut my mouth about certain things in the way journalists are required to. I got very lucky that I hit the one queer professor at the right time. And like long-term plan, that's also part of what I'm about, right? I mean, I can talk about fixing the internet. And if I really want to get going on that goal, there's only so much I can do in my lifetime, right? The internet's going to outlast me. Some of them, these sites might even outlast me. You know, it's funny. For the longest time, the joke was, well, don't do research on Facebook. It'll be gone next year. And it's been over a decade. It's not gone. It's not going anywhere. And the joke right now is, oh, don't do work on TikTok. It's going to be gone as soon as the pandemic's over. No, it's not. It's going to stick around for a good long while. At the very least, they're going to remember how much money Vine could have made in the years after it shut down, because people became nostalgic about it. But really, the long-term way for me to fix the internet, I have to train more people like me. As part of the reason that I deal with many parts of academia that I don't like, being a professor, running a lab, training PhD students, that is how, instead of doing a series of really valuable studies, I do a series of really valuable studies and create an army of people that will do similar things. And not just people like me, right? I mean, my plan here is once I get a lab going, obviously I'm going to take a bunch of trans femme people, but I really want to make sure I'm branching out. And, you know, I don't want them to all be white. I don't want them to all be my kind of neurodivergent, right? I don't even want all of them to be necessarily lesbian or like woman-loving woman and everything. I want to make sure I have some ace students. Like, there are so many different groups of people that need their own scientists. I mean, this is the thing that I think we miss a lot of the time. We like to think of science as objective. That's utter bullshit. That's 100% utter bullshit. There can be better arguments made in the bench sciences, but even there, I'm skeptical.
No, in physics, who is doing the studying very much matters.
Right. And it's this way for social computing and HCI too. So how can I make an impact now? These studies. How can I make a lasting impact? Training all different sorts of people who can deploy it into their own communities and do what I'm doing for trans femmes right now. I'm not the person that should write the study about Black trans femmes. One of the people I'm training is.
That is actually a really good transition into my next question, which is for people who want to do research in your field professionally, who want to go into social computing, who maybe are really interested in the research you're doing and want to learn more about it. For high school and early college, like undergraduate students, what advice would you have for people who want to go into this field, want to fix the internet with you?
The biggest piece of advice I would give to like high school age students is to broaden how you're thinking about this, right? I don't encounter high school students nearly as much as I encounter college students, obviously. But when I do encounter high school students that are interested in this kind of thing, one thing that they seem to be obsessed with is like how well you can do the technical parts, how well you can code, that kind of thing. And that is in many ways important. And frankly, if you don't stay in academia, having those coding skills will raise your salary quite a bit. So yeah, I mean, if you've got a talent for that, do please pursue it. But that gets you to computer science. I don't do computer science. I do information science, right? That's like the kind of academic umbrella that HCI tends to live in and social computing absolutely lives in. And that's not just programming skills. That's not just technical skills. So honestly, if a high school student wants to really start thinking about like, hey, maybe I would go to college for this kind of thing, pick a program based on that, keep building those technical skills, but start reading books. Start reading a lot of books about technology, because that is where you get the context from, right? You can learn how to program the greatest algorithm in the world. It's not going to mean shit if you haven't read like Algorithms of Oppression by Safia Noble. We have a lot of good literature out there now that is not academic literature. Well, I mean, it's academic literature and that has that rigor, and we count it as academic books, but it's written by people that are in these communities, and it is generally written in a way that I think a high school student could understand. Weapons of Math Destruction is another really good one. I could provide like a whole list here. My friend Casey actually does TikToks where she like sings these lists for high school students.
Send me links to them, and I'll put them in the description down below.
Yeah, we'll do.
Fill that with links, and also to your TikTok and Casey's TikTok.
Yeah, I will. And so yeah, for high school students, I think the advice is broaden beyond the technical, because the technical is, we're kind of in a place where the technical skills are kind of the entry fee. To succeed, you need to do a lot more. And you get a big head start on that by listening to the people that are living this stuff. For college students, that advice still holds. And one hopes that in a general ed curriculum, they are encountering these books. And from what I'm seeing more and more, this is happening. It's a new thing that a book about algorithms could be, that every campus has their, let's make the whole campus read one book program that everybody's obsessed with. Some of those are about algorithms now, and you might actually encounter it in your general ed. But if you really, really want to dig into this, two things. If your school has an information science major, check it out. That is probably where the bulk of these things live in your university. Sometimes they'll be called human-centered computing. That's also like if you're like a place like Georgia Tech, for example, it'll be called human-centered computing. But they're similar enough that they both work. The mistake a lot of college students make, and by mistake they make, I mean like a mistake they bring to me to fix a lot of the time, is they will sign up to be a CS major, and then a year into it, they'll realize, wait a minute, I hate all of this. What is this? And then they'll hear about my department. And it's like, yeah, what you wanted was information science the whole time. Let's get the transfer paperwork started. So, be aware, CS may not be the place to study the kind of computing you want. Information science often is. And often that's not even in the same school, right? I sit in a school of media communication and information. Computer science is other side of campus, actually. Actually, literally other side of campus. And then I guess the other thing, and this is the thing people miss, do research as an undergraduate. You can do research as an undergraduate, right? I didn't have this opportunity, and I really wish I would have. And I do a lot of research programs with undergraduates now, because the best way to figure out if you want to pursue research as a career is not to talk to a bunch of researchers, it's to do research. And if you can get like a summer-long thing, I think that is the best way to figure out if you'd actually maybe like to pursue a master's or even a PhD once you're done. At the very least, it could very clearly tell you if this is the major for you. If you do an entire summer of information science research with someone like me and you love it, yeah, you should probably switch your major to that. It's clearly your passion. And if you do really, really well and you find yourself at the end of the summer not wanting it to stop, maybe you're someone that should think about grad school. And, of course, having the research experience on your CV really helps you get into grad school.
Yeah.
So yeah, getting involved. And just as a note, professors are bad at communication. Like as a group of people, we are bad at communication. It's not actually part of the PhD program. Like no one teaches you how to communicate this stuff. I'm lucky. Again, I was a journalist before this, so I can do all of this just because I had the skills already. But some of the most brilliant people I know cannot explain their way out of a paper bag. So you, the student, may have to go and ask about research opportunities, right? It may not have occurred to a professor, especially a younger professor, that a student might be interested. In terms of like how to make that connection, this is my tip that I give every undergrad and master student that's trying to like get into a PhD program or do research with someone. Read their latest paper and have an interesting question to ask about it. They don't expect you to understand the whole thing. They know that they barely understand that whole thing. But the fact that you paid attention, the fact that you looked it up, and the fact that you asked an intelligent question, even if, it was already explained in the paper a little bit, asking them to expound on a little bit more. I mean, all of us have more to say than is in our papers, most certainly. Showing that interest, that can get you a research gig. And some of them even pay pretty well. I mean, when I was at Northwestern, I think I was paying better than most people on campus for the summer research apprenticeships. There's a lot of opportunities. I mean, unfortunately, it's not at every college, but most of them at some point will, at this point, have some level of research opportunities for undergraduates. And if you're at like an R1, especially like a big R1 state school, I guarantee you there are programs. At most of those schools, there are actually programs where you as an undergraduate could find your own funds. And let me tell you, showing up at a professor's office with, I'd like to assist you for the summer, and I already agreed, I got the university to agree to pay for it. Yeah, they're gonna say yes. It's free money. They're not gonna say no. So yeah, getting involved. Getting involved is the best way to do it once you're at the college level. And honestly, doing all that reading in high school will make you extremely hireable, because they'll ask you a gotcha question in the interview and you'll be like, actually, I read this thing.
To second the do research suggestion, even if you're not sure about grad school, and even if you don't end up pursuing grad school, I did research as an undergrad, had great experiences, decided research wasn't for me. That's okay. Research was for me. Research in an academic only setting wasn't for me. And then all national labs had a hiring freeze during the winter of my senior year. But having that research experience also provided great experience on that resume for applying to jobs outside of academia. People love to see that you did research. They love that you did your own projects and can explain them. That will give you a leg up, even if you choose not to go into academia. Doing research over the summer is just as valuable as doing an internship at a consulting firm. In fact, sometimes it makes you stand out more, unless I guess it's the same consulting firm and they hire you from the intern. Don't give up that opportunity if that's what you want, but doing research is always a good idea.
Also, they tend to be more fun summer jobs. I mean, working at a consulting company for the summer, you're doing a lot of busy work and filing. You work for me for the summer, I am probably going to task you with, okay, I've got 50 trans people. I need you to keep them calm while I ask questions. So what you're going to do is you're going to lead a community activity. And then we're going to use your observations of the community activity as data as well. And I will have trained them for all that stuff. Research in many ways is fun, especially qualitative research. You can be really creative with it. I think people underestimate how creative you can get.
For people who are interested in casually staying up to date in your work, for example, me, for people like me and many of our viewers, I know you're on TikTok. I know you have friends on TikTok. Send me those links. I'll put them below. The books that you recommended, I will put those links below. Do you have any other recommendations?
I'll send a few different academic TikToks along. They, like me, often do content on their research, although I definitely do a lot more explicitly queer and explicitly trans content than a lot of them do. My TikTok's kind of a hybrid affair. So I don't know to what extent people are still into Twitter, since Twitter has really become a very, very specific academics and journalists thing lately. But there are a number of people who write the books. I will send recommendations onto you. They constantly talk about this stuff in a very rip from the headlines way. I would not necessarily recommend anybody gets big into Twitter right now, because it's sort of a garbage fire. But just kind of having an account that essentially works as a thread reader is not a bad idea. A lot of the most cutting edge stuff is going to wind up on Twitter. And the people that do it well know how to explain themselves well. There's a couple people down at UNC, actually, that are really, really good about this. And even past computing, they had really interesting analysis on the pandemic and everything, too. And it sounds so old school, but books, go to the library. Books are still often the best way to learn about things. I know that's a frustrating answer for everybody, but they are. Books have longevity for a reason. I was that kid at the public library all the time when I was young, so I highly encourage that.
Same. I am still not allowed unsupervised into a bookstore. Thank you so much, Dr. DeVito, for stopping by. For everyone, I will put links to all of the things we mentioned in the description, including Dr. DeVito's Twitter and her website. Thank you all for staying to the end of the interview. Remember to always keep an open mind, especially when it comes to science. Astra out.
Ad Astra, to the stars, to the stars.